Hello everybody and welcome to our latest live and ticking event. This is the 8th one that we've done since last July and hopefully it's going to be a great session. Before we get into it, I'd just like to remind everybody that the session's being recorded today and it'll be available on the website from next week. By way of introduction, I'm Mike Taylor. I'm the Commercial Director at British Heart Foundation and I'm responsible for all our shops and stores, our online and our other commercial activities. And I would like to thank you all for joining us today. So each month we're delighted to bring you the latest BHF news and pioneering research stories. Last month we did it a little differently and introduced our supporters to our fantastic clinical team. If you joined us, thank you very much for being so engaged and asking such brilliant questions. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of BHF news and then we'll move on to the main event. So as most of you know, our income in the last 12 months has been severely impacted. And as a result of that, we've had to reduce our investment in research. And it is going to be a long recovery ahead, and we are in urgent need of support. However, we have continued to innovate during this time to protect our income. And I'd just like to share some key news and some fundraising highlights around that. So firstly, around our closure of our shops and stores, which is obviously close to my heart, in line with government guidelines, all our shops and stores are closed to protect the public from COVID-19, and we've also paused our eBay activity. However, during this time, you can continue to show your support by posting as your unwanted items using our new free post donation service that we've just launched, and you'll find that on the website. There are around 7.4 million people living with heart and circulatory disease in the UK, so every item that you buy or donate helps us make a difference. Secondly, February is National Heart Month. So this Heart Month, our corporate partners are supporting us through a range of activities and promotions. So you can shop, show your support on social media and more, knowing that you're raising vital funds for BHF research. For example, Mindful Chef, who the mail order meal in a box company, have introduced a new range of recipes to help keep your heart healthy and are offering £10 off customers' first and second recipe boxes. So if you just need to visit the Mindful Chef website and use the code BHF10X2, which I'm sure nobody will remember, so we'll post that in the sidebar and you enter that at the checkout. Thirdly, I just want to flag a partnership that we've done with a company called Amaze. This is an organisation that offers once-in-a-lifetime experiences and prizes to raise money for charities. Their £1 million house draw will support our life-saving work at a time when help is needed more than ever. And by taking part, you could become the proud owner of an incredible house in London worth £3 million. So the lucky owner is going to be announced on Friday, the 9th of April, 2021, obviously. So again, please look at the link in the chat box for more information if interested. And then finally, Heart Heroes 2021. So our Heart Hero Award nominations open tomorrow on the 25th of February. And we welcome people nominating their healthcare hero, their innovative fundraiser, or a young heart hero. It's always a real key highlight in the BHF year. So now looking towards today's event, which, as you all know, is on Takotsubo Cardiomyopathy. And I'm delighted to tell you that today we're joined by Professor Dana Dawson from the University of Aberdeen, an ex-ballerina Caron Curragh, who has experienced a Takotsubo event. So before we get started, we're just going to use an online survey tool, and I'd like to pose you a question, and we'd like to know, how much do you know about the research into Takotsubo Cardiomyopathy? And you just rate it from 1 to 5, 1 being very little, 5 being a lot. So if you could just pop in a response to that, it would give us a really helpful pulse. So the results are in, and great to see that, no, not great to see, I'm reading this the wrong way around. So the reason why 1 is red is because that's very little, so that's 50%. And then the others are fairly evenly distributed. So clearly could be a great event in terms of building on that knowledge. And we'll return to this question later on. So at that point, and without further ado, I'm now delighted to be able to hand over to Professor Dana Dawson.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share my PowerPoint presentation, so if you bear with me for just one moment whilst I'm able to do that. Okay. And I hope that everyone can see my screen. Is that okay? I can't see you on my screen at the moment. Hang on a second. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet, Dana. Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Screen 2.
Perfect. Thanks, Dana.
You are able to see it now, right? Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you very much. So Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Well, what is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy? Well, it is an acute form of heart dysfunction which mimics a heart attack in its presentation, with chest pain, ECG changes, and similar blood test abnormalities. In contrast to a heart attack, however, patients have non-blocked heart arteries and a typical abnormal movement pattern of the heart muscle. The main chamber of the heart, the left ventricle, is said to be ballooning, as instead of contracting inwards, it ends up blowing out like a balloon being inflated with air. And you can see a typical image of a ballooning heart in this movie here. Contrast is injected in the heart at this stage. The hallmark of this condition, based on the data that we currently have, is that it is often precipitated by an intense episode of emotional or physical stress. However, there are cases in which the stressful element, whether it is emotional or physical or combined, is not that obvious. And in a smaller number of cases, there is no stress that can be identified at all. Furthermore, although acute complications and mortality have been recognized in this condition, Takotsubo has been mostly seen as a self-limiting condition with rapid and complete recovery in inverted commas. So what does Takotsubo mean? I think we can put up a poll to see whether people know where this name comes from. And I think we'll allow for about 15-20 seconds for this, for the answers to come through. That is impressive. That is impressive as results, I have to say. Well, there are a few conditions in medicine that have an eponym, which means that the name refers to a person or an object as a symbol which identifies with the medical condition. And this is one of them. Takotsubo is the Japanese word for an octopus trapping pot that the Japanese fishermen traditionally place on the seabed to trap an octopus. The condition was first described in Japan back in early 1990s by Dr. Sato, who, after visualizing a heart image identical to the one I showed you on the first slide, he exclaimed in admiration, "Well, this is a Takotsubo." And thus the condition was baptized and the eponym was created. You can see a real Takotsubo pot in the color picture here on the right. And on the left, there's a drawing that I hold very close to my heart because it was made by a colleague of mine, Dr. David Northridge, when he lost a bet that we two placed. He thought the pot was a lobster pot, but in fact it was an octopus. So how do we diagnose Takotsubo? What happens? We first think of Takotsubo when investigating patients as an emergency admission. Because their heart arteries are clear, not blocked like in a heart attack, as shown here in these images. You can see the right coronary here and the left coronary tree here. Both of them are nice, smooth, and normal. Sometimes the ECG is very suggestive. And what I have placed here is an ECG that we now colloquially call a taco ECG. You can see these negative spikes that are present throughout the ECG, which we call Mariana Trench T waves because they are so deep and so inverse compared to a normal ECG. But unfortunately, these do not appear until about 24 to 48 hours after acute presentation. So they're not quite as useful in emergency situations. The other investigations we do show us that the heart muscle is very swollen, like a sponge full of water. And you can see this in the color-coded images shown here, which show the muscle swelling in red in the Takotsubo patients compared to the green seen in the matched controls. Additionally, the heart is significantly lacking energy, or its ability to generate energy. The condition is not as rare as we thought, and although it was initially said to be occurring mostly in women, we diagnose it in women and men of all ages. The time from the stressful event to the onset of the condition can also be highly variable. Although it was initially thought that it could be associated with mental health conditions, we start to understand that such an association may perhaps have been overstated, and maybe this condition occurs in people with a certain predisposition or susceptibility to it. What is certain is that there is so much more to consider and unravel. I am going to present some of our data that we have done in the last 5-6 years and published. And I will go through 2 landmark studies that were published in the last 2 years. They were called Heroic and Terrific. And on this slide here, you can see data from the Heroic study. Here, we looked at patients who had suffered an episode of Takotsubo approximately 2 years previously. We learned that some patients continued to have some symptoms even at 2 years, and that was a novelty at that time. We looked therefore at the level of energy that the heart muscle is able to generate, and we learned that this was lower, shown here in blue, compared to the age and gender matched controls shown here in red. And this finding overall is suggesting the possibility of a metabolic abnormality in the heart muscle. Then we asked our patients to step on a treadmill, and we measured the exercise performance similar to how athletes are tested. This represents a gold standard in this investigation. When we did this, we saw again differences compared to matched controls, here shown again in blue versus red, representing overall a lesser degree of fitness in our patients. This finding is seen in other types of heart muscle disease and indicates that patients with prior Takotsubo can also develop persistent cardiac limitation. This work overall allowed us to inform the medical profession that patients should be counseled appropriately regarding the long-term consequences after an episode of Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. It also raised further questions into the mechanisms of disease that can possibly lead to such long-term changes. So then we tried to address these mechanistic questions in our next study, in the Terrific study. And in the Terrific study, we administered some highly specialized contrast that tracks inflammatory cells. And thus, we were able to visualize the location of these cells in the heart muscle with sophisticated cardiac MRI scanning. We were able to show that there was accumulation of inflammatory cells in the heart muscle during the acute presentation, shown here in red and blue, versus the gray representing the matched healthy controls. This inflammation was the substrate for the swelling of the heart muscle, which we had previously observed. And this swelling took approximately 6 months to resolve, to dissipate. You can see here on the lower pane, the panel here, the inflammation of the swelling of the heart muscle represented here in the acute stage. You can see how this cross-section of the heart, looking like a donut, is quite representative, is quite swollen. This recovers partly, not fully. Here it was done at 5 months, but it is on its way to recovery to look similar to a matched control shown here. Furthermore, we noticed a very different pattern of inflammatory blood cells in Takotsubo patients, which we show here in red, compared to the control volunteers, which are shown in gray. Overall, there was increase in the pro-inflammatory blood cells at the expense of the decrease in the patrolling and reparative cells. And some of these changes persisted in the long term, shown here in the green bars. Therefore, we demonstrated that Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is accompanied by heart muscle and general inflammatory activation, and that this can evolve into a low-grade, longer-term inflammatory state, which may be responsible for the long-term symptoms and findings of the previous study, the HEROIC study. Well, we have therefore progressed a long way from not knowing much about this disease just 15 years ago. However, the reality of the current stage is that we still do not have any proven therapy to prevent any recurrences or to mitigate the symptoms that some of these patients experience or to improve their survival. We have therefore initiated the first interventional study in the early rehabilitation of Takotsubo patients, and currently we are running several studies in our center, and I will exemplify 2 of them, please, and breakout. Both of these studies recruit patients early after they experience an episode of Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, within 3 weeks more precisely. And after enrollment, patients are assigned to one of these 3 groups: standard of care, exercise, or cognitive behavioral therapy. Standard of care is what is our best knowledge currently in the NHS. We treat the patients to what we think is best to do based on the evidence that we currently have. The exercise program involves these patients in a prescribed, personalized exercise program. Initially, we intended to bring patients to the cardiac research facility here in Aberdeen and do it under our direct supervision. But unfortunately, the pandemic made us change these plans because obviously that was not achievable. So what we ended up doing is to purchase rowing machines and exercise training bikes, which we sent to patients' homes. We prescribe the exercise program and we monitor this remotely via Bluetooth connection. And finally, the cognitive behavioral therapy course is quite intense. It also happens over 12 weeks. And this course draws on psychoeducation, on mindfulness. It focuses on how negative life events, stresses, or challenges can lead to changes in the way that we think, in the way that we feel, and ultimately leads to changes in our behavior. So this vicious circle in the altered thinking, altered feeling, and altered behavior can sometimes spiral out of control, leading to worsening of well-being. We identify problematic thinking patterns, and we try to provide a structural approach to recalibrate and refocus the individual. All these interventions take 3 months in total, after which we return the patients to our research facility and we repeat the study investigations. In the PLEASE study, the study follows and focuses on the effects of these interventions on the heart muscle, on the general well-being and the fitness recovery. So we look at heart energetics, at muscle swelling or muscle swelling recovery, and at the general functional recovery with treadmill exercise testing, as I have already shown. In the breakout study, which we are only just commencing, We explore the levels of mental stress and how the brain reacts and adapts during and after a Takotsubo event. We are also looking at how chemicals in the brain may indirectly be responsible for the heart muscle malfunction in Takotsubo. So this is work in progress and is part of our activity. And I think I am going to draw it to a close at this stage, and I will be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Over to you, Mike. And you're on mute, thank you.
Yeah, unmute myself. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dawson. That was fascinating. I'm now going to introduce Caron Curragh. Over to you, Caron.
Hi there. Can everybody see me, hear me? Okay. Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you. So thank you, Professor Dawson. That was an amazing talk, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot from that today. So thank you for that. So I've actually had a number of Takotsubo events, but today I'm just going to sort of focus on the major one because it was so acute, it literally almost killed me. So I fall into the category where the major event was definitely stress caused. I'd had a mild interaction with my neighbor over something really, really trivial. It sounds over not being able to get onto my driveway for 4 days because they'd dropped a load of building materials on there. So in the scheme of things, you know, nothing major there at all. But during the sort of confrontation, I did remain very calm. And I just remember my last words were, well, you know, I'm not getting anywhere here. So I just walked indoors. And as soon as I'd closed my door, I had what I would call a sort of classic Hollywood style heart attack feeling. So I started immediately with really, really acute chest pain, pain at the back of my left shoulder blade. And then I started to feel really sick and I went clammy. So very, very sort of classic, you know, sort of signs that there was something going on wrong with my heart. And then I got breathless. So to cut a long story short, the paramedics were called. I was taken to my local hospital. There, I was left in A&E. I think I went into A&E about 4:30 p.m. This was in October 2013, so quite a while ago to remember the smaller details. But it was around 4:30 in the afternoon I went in. And then I was finally admitted onto a ward at 1:30 the following morning. And my husband joined me in A&E, and I was feeling really, really rough, still having the chest pain and everything. And I was triaged, and my husband kept popping up to reception and asking, when was I going to be seen? And then I think it got to about 11:30 midnight time when we just noticed I'd literally started to turn blue. We'd watched my fingertips turn blue first, and then it was just gradually spreading. So my husband said, somebody really needs to see my wife now. And then 1:30 in the morning, I was admitted onto a ward, and then literally all hell broke loose. I still remember that quite clearly. A nurse rushing in and a couple of doctors saying, I'd had some results through. I guess they were my troponin levels, which were really high, and that they knew there was something serious wrong with my heart, but they didn't know what. So they were going to rush me over to John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. So I was in hospital for 4 or 5 days, and then I was discharged. And then, unfortunately, 2 days later, same thing happened again. So I was readmitted for another week. When I was discharged, I remember having a sneaky peek at my ECGs that were at the end of my bed. And I sort of noticed that they were still reading sort of possible ischemia. So I knew that they weren't right at that point. And I did say to the clinician who was discharging me, are you sure you're happy for me to go home this time? And the words still are so clear in my mind over 7 years ago. What I was told was, yes, we know there's something wrong with your heart, but we're not quite sure what it is now. But at your age, you will learn to live with it. So basically, go away. And that's what I did. And I remember, leaving the hospital with my husband, and I was really frightened. I felt isolated, and I felt invisible, totally out of control with regards to my health, what was going on, what would be my life, on forward from there. So I wasn't happy with that response. If I just learned to live with that, I'd been an ex-dancer. My whole life work had been in the realm of some form of movement and sort of keeping fit. So I was really unhappy with that, and I luckily managed to find a specialist in Takotsubo who was based in London. So that's sort of really sort of my story as to the event. Where I'm left now as a result of the Takotsubo in 2013, I've been left with ongoing arrhythmias. So I had 2 cardiac ablations. The first one didn't work at all. The second one was successful in as much as it stopped the arrhythmias that were starting from the pulmonary veins, but I'm still left with ongoing tachycardia arrhythmias daily. That was sort of monitoring. Third ablation's out of the question because my arrhythmias start in sort of multifocal areas, rogue cells here, there, and everywhere. And my cardiologist who performed the ablations described it beautifully when he said, if we do a third one, it would be like carpet bombing your heart, and he'd maybe cause damage accidentally that we wouldn't want to happen. So we're monitoring that. I have regular Holter monitors and consultations. The other thing Takotsubo left me with was valve problems. So I have heart scans every year to monitor what the valves are doing. I think the mitral one at the last scan was moderate. And the other thing that Takotsubo caused was really, really acute migraines that with aura in my left eye. Never had a headache before in my life before Takotsubo. So these started almost straight away after the major event and gradually got worse. And over the last year and a half, the consensus is I've had 3 mini strokes. So we're just really still trying to get to the bottom of whether they were cardiac led because of the arrhythmias, or it's known that mini strokes and strokes can be brought on by really acute migraines as well. And the neurologist that I see, interestingly, said quite often after a major health event like heart failure, that can quite often be a trigger for other things occurring. So we know with the support group, I'll talk about briefly in a moment, there seems to be a trigger for autoimmune disease. And in my case, it was the migraines with the aura. So how am I today? So I don't want to leave, that like looking like it's a picture of gloom and doom, because, generally I feel really, really well. I exercise every day. I cycle, I run, I go on long walks. I'm back to working full time. I study as well. So I really lead a really sort of rich, fulfilling life. I just look upon it as, I just have these blips where, if I have a bad arrhythmia run for a couple of days, it'll just sort of knock me for 6 for about 48 hours. But I do always recover and bounce back and forget about that and then sort of move on. So I just didn't want to leave that part of my talk on, an air of negativity. I do have far many brilliant days than I do not so good days. So where did all of this lead me? When I found the consultant in London who specialised in Takotsubo, and after about 4 months, I had a nuclear scan, which actually showed I still had a storm going on in my heart. So that was really, really good clarification for me that I wasn't imagining it, and there was something real going on still after 4 or 5 months. So I remember leaving the consultation when I had the results from that, making a promise that one day I would set some form of group up where I could really help people, because I did not want any other people to almost fall through the net like I could have easily done if I had, hadn't been prepared to think, no, I am going to have a life for this, and I've got a story ongoing. So I think about 2016, I set up a support group. I remember sitting and thinking before I went live, supposing I am the only person who joins, but I'm really, really pleased to say that we've now got over 2,300 members of the group, and it's a lovely global group as well. And the members they're so giving, and the members have just made it such a wonderful community. Big thank you to any of those who are listening today. After about a year, there's a lovely lady in Australia called Angela Cuccia, a clinical researcher in Takotsubo and a cardiac nurse. And unbeknown to me or Angela at the time, she'd set up a group as well. So made contact with me and we joined forces. So, that's been a wonderful collaboration. And then as a springboard from that, in discussion, we decided we could really do with a website as well to cover the common questions that come up on the support group. Angela spent a lot of time putting up some brilliant information for clinicians who might not be au fait with Takotsubo. So there's a clinicians area, there's a patients area as well. So that's a work in progress. We continue to work on that and update it as and when need be. And then we're just in the throes of talking to some specialists about putting some online Zoom sessions on with invited clinicians, and we've got our first 2 sorted out, so that we're going to be providing that for the support groups soon. And, other great collaborations have come out from all of this as well. So I was a co-author of a short paper with another lovely member of the support group. And we had that published in one of the ESC journals. And the name of that was Takotsubo Voices to be Heard. So it's very much from the patient side. And I think that's probably my time up now. So I will stop there. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you very much, Caron. That was incredibly powerful, I have to say, and very, very honest. So we're now going to move to a question and answer session. It's going to be moderated by Leanne. We've had a number of pre-submitted questions, which we'll move to first. But since then, we've had lots of live questions coming in. Even if we can't get to a specific question today, everybody that asks a question will get a personal email response. So really encourage you to post if there's something that you'd like to raise. So moving on, I'm going to hand over now to Leanne.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Professor Dawson and Caron. That was really interesting. And we have a question for you, Professor Dawson. And it says, I had a Takotsubo event 18 months ago. Heart scanned afterwards, went back to normal, but decided to retire from university work as too stressful. Do such events reoccur?
Well, we know that there are recurrences that can happen after the first episode. And we are actually in the process of drawing the results of the Scottish Takotsubo registry ourselves here. Scotland is a small country, but it has a magnificent electronic data record linkage, which allows essentially following up in an anonymous way every single individual that has had a health condition. So with the data being anonymized, we're able to look at large data sets and draw conclusions about this. Because I think when we're talking about things like this, such as recurrences, it's important to know the rate of recurrence in a big population, representative of a country, rather than anyone's individual experience, a clinician's experience, a practitioner experience, or even a group of practitioners' experience, because with all the best intention in the world, you're not in the hospital 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, so you don't know everything that goes on. So these large data registry data studies are actually quite important for information such as this. And we know from an initial look that the rate of recurrence is sitting at around 15%. So individuals who have been diagnosed with an episode once have a chance of having a second one. Yet again, 15% of them will do. We also know that it's possible to have a third, a fourth, a fifth event as well. The highest number that we've seen here in our unit is 8. However, the good news about it is that every time that one of these happens, the recovery after each of them seems to be the same. So it doesn't seem to affect the heart any more in long term with any additional recovery, other than people who compared to people who have only had one episode. At least this is the wisdom that we have at this stage, because you do appreciate that this is a field that is evolving and we learn more by the day in this condition.
Thank you, Dana. We have another question for you. That's, what tests could be done in A&E to diagnose Takotsubo in people who have had it before? And the possibility of a second attack seems routinely ignored and only myocardial infarction tested for.
This is a very hard question, I have to say, because we do not have a biomarker that is specific for Takotsubo. So it's something that we're thinking about. It's something that we're exploring a great deal. It would be fantastic if you could just do a blood test and be able to diagnose it with certainty, with sufficient sensitivity and specificity to be absolutely certain that that is Takotsubo. You do have, because the overlapping clinical presentation, it mimics a myocardial infarction, it mimics a heart attack. So the treatment for a heart attack, as people well know, is opening up of the heart artery. And if one doesn't open up a heart artery in somebody who has a heart attack, then there are very harmful consequences upon the heart muscle and the function of the heart and the well-being of the individual. So at the moment, we cannot afford the luxury when we see a patient who could have either or to fall into the trap of false security that could be Takotsubo and we wouldn't be investigating it as a heart attack. as a myocardial infarction. We have to do the tests that are able to tell us with clarity which one it is. And unfortunately, this involves invasive tests, like a coronary angiogram, involves cardiac MRIs in some of them. And only after we've done those tests, and we waited for a couple of days at least, you remember the slide where I showed you how the ECG changes? And once you start to see those kind of changes, which are only apparent a little bit later on, like on the ECG, and the results of the blood tests, the results of the angiogram, the results of the cardiac MRI, you put it all together and you make the diagnosis. And you know very well that this is not possible to just do in A&E. We have a sum of tests that we do. After we do all those tests, we draw the line, we put two and two together, and we decide what it is. And this is how it works at the moment. But we do very much have in our minds that a biomarker specific enough for Takotsubo would be a fantastic achievement, and research needs to be done in this area to uncover it.
Thank you, Dan. And on that note, actually, we have another question. Are researchers getting any closer to finding a way to prevent Takotsubo? After having two events, I would really like to avoid any more.
This is even more difficult question. We don't have any medication currently that we know is preventing subsequent events. This study that we're doing with regards to early rehabilitation is going to look at recurrences as well, although the sample size of the patients that we are going to enroll is going to be small. Therefore, it's going to give us just a pilot tester, if you like, to this question. Whether exercise or cognitive behavioral therapy may have a beneficial effect in preventing recurrences is certainly something that we can contemplate, and this is one of the questions that we're asking here. At the moment, we don't know of any medication or any lifestyle intervention that we can prescribe to individuals which will result in a reduction of recurrences.
Thank you. One more question before we ask some questions to Caron. Do you think it is becoming more widely known that Takotsubo cardiomyopathy can and does have long-term health consequences for some people? And do you have a sense of the proportion of people for whom this is the case?
I think it is. I think it is becoming more widely known. We set our first Takotsubo follow-up clinic back in 2011, expecting that when we see the patients at follow-up, we would be able to just sign everything off, see that everyone is recovered, discharge the patients, and consider this a transient, fleeting, self-limiting, and recovered, cured episode. And it's only because we found out that following up patients in that clinic, we found out that some of them were still expressing difficulty, and they were finding it difficult to reinsert themselves, especially into the physical activities that they were used to be able to do prior to experiencing their event. It's only then that we thought that maybe there's more than meets the eye in that respect. And that's when we designed the HEROIC study. And I think the HEROIC study was the first study that actually showed not only that patients have remaining residual symptoms, but also that symptoms are substantiated by the findings that we saw in that study that were present in the heart muscle and in the heart function particularly. The proportion of individuals that remain symptomatic after Takotsubo, to our estimation, is between 50 and 60%. Once again, once we are able to draw up the entire data set representative of a country out of the Scottish registry, we are going to have more precise numbers about this because everybody will be included. So we will know better, but our estimate at the moment is between 50 and 60%.
Thank you very much, Dana. The next question is for Caron. Caron, looking back at your experience of Takotsubo, what has been your biggest learning?
Gosh, I think the the biggest learning is, never, ever, ever give up. And that's on two fronts. If you feel dissatisfied with the clinician you're seeing, seek somebody out that really, really knows about the condition, and that, it's not the benign, heart condition that it was thought to be, a number of years ago now. So never, ever give up until you find the right person, and you can then go on to have the best treatment possible for the best outcome. And the other thing is the same words: never, ever, ever give up on your own body. I know when I did my first sort of talk down at the Royal Brompton on a Patients Awareness Day, I think we've had about 4 or 5 of those organised now. I said, way back then, sort of 6 years ago, my mantra had been, dust yourself off, pick yourself up and start all over again. And since I gave that talk, I've had loads of instances, like with the ablations and with the mini strokes, where I've actually got really, really down. But it was like, no, I'm not going down that downward spiral. I will pick myself up and dust myself off. So, just keep believing in, the amazing innate quality of your own body. It wants to heal, and our bodies want to be the best that they can. So if you've got the setback, tomorrow's another day, and tomorrow will be a better day. So I think my biggest take is never, never give up on those two fronts.
Thank you, Caron. That is very inspiring. Our next question for you: how have you found living with a heart condition during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, with that, I mean, I've been very careful. When the announcement came almost a year ago about going into lockdown, Professor Dawson and 3 other, also well-renowned Takotsubo specialists around the world, very, very, I emailed them, say, look, what should we advise Takotsubo patients to do on the support group? And they all very kindly responded with very, very good advice. So, I've stayed safe. I've been working from home rather than going out to my normal workplace for almost a year now. And so I was concerned like everybody else, but I was really, really careful. My husband, bless him, did all of the shopping. When I went out for my outdoor activity, it was at the really quiet times of day when I knew there wouldn't be very many people around. And I felt quite calm about it until I had a conversation with my cardiologist about 4 weeks ago, who said that the latest research is showing that Takotsubo is happening in some COVID patients who've had really, really healthy hearts before. So his words were, because I've had Takotsubo before, that I should really be extra cautious and make sure I was doing everything not to contract it, because if I did, or any other patients who'd had Takotsubo events, we were at a higher risk of actually going into heart failure should we contract COVID. So it was only really 5 weeks ago that it was like, okay, I've got to really, really stay safe now. And I didn't think I was, apart from a sensible concern, but yesterday I got my day for my vaccination, and the relief of getting that, I thought, actually maybe I was a little bit concerned than my conscious mind was making out, because the relief of, next week I get my first inoculation. It's I've been cautious, but sensibly, not getting over anxious about it, in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Caron. And we have a question for Professor Dawson, all the way from Ohio in the States. Teresa is part of Caron's support group, and she's asking Professor Dawson, and many of us are on a variety of medications related to Takotsubo. Do you have a suggestion on what medication or a combination of medication works best?
I'm afraid the answer to this question is going to be disappointing to Teresa, because I don't have a solution to this in the absence of any data that we have currently. So what I can say is that patients with Takotsubo who are admitted acutely are treated in exactly the same way that any acute heart failure patient would be otherwise treated. So depending on their response and on the clinical presentation, things are done in exactly the same manner, with a number of modifications that we have noticed over the years, and I think about which almost all clinicians are now quite knowledgeable and are happy to implement. Aside from that, because the acute phase is only the first 3 to 5 days, so after 5 days, what do you do? And the big answer and the most honest answer is that we don't know. We don't know. We don't know what kind of therapy will improve the symptoms, will make people feel better, what kind of therapy will prevent recurrences, what kind of therapy will improve prognosis. These are big unknowns in a condition that, may I remind you, has only been described 15 years ago. So we didn't have time to accumulate that data and to do these clinical trials. Clinical trials take years to plan, to execute, to analyze, to conclude from, and we don't have this data. We have to work towards it. It will take time. It will take a lot of time. In the meanwhile, we're trying to do what we can, and we think that we are, with our early rehabilitation study, which is basically more of a lifestyle intervention in patients that can be applied acutely in the same way that cardiac rehabilitation is applied to patients after a myocardial infarction. We're hoping to have some answers in, well, not before 3 years. This is going to be, these take time as well. But with regards to medical therapy, there remains a big unknown, I'm afraid.
Thank you. And we have a question from Zina. And Zina said, has there been an increase in Takotsubo disease with COVID?
We think there has. There have been 2 reports, both of them coming from the United States, which showed that during the first 9 months after the COVID pandemic officially started in March, so for the first 9 months of 2020, there have been significantly more cases in the centers that were investigated in that report compared to the previous year, to March to December 2019. So there has been an increase in the number of cases. This data is again still quite raw, quite recent. We haven't had a chance to look at our own data yet. We probably won't be able to look at it for another 6 to 9 months at the very least to know exactly at a national level what the numbers are. But every report that I've seen so far in the literature says that Takotsubo has been on the increase in the times of the pandemic.
Thank you. One last question for you, Professor Dawson. Does having type 2 diabetes make it more likely to have Takotsubo? And also, does having episodes of nausea connected with Takotsubo before and after?
I'll answer the second one first. We don't recognize nausea as a characteristic symptom of Takotsubo. That is not to say that somebody who has nausea for a different physical condition may not experience nausea more so due to that condition, and then they develop Takotsubo as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that Takotsubo's caused it. There may be an association, but there may not be a causality in that association, if that makes sense. With regards to type 2 diabetes, the data is quite conflicting. Our own data shows that there isn't an increased risk in patients with type 2 diabetes in developing Takotsubo. Having said that, we have had patients with type 2 diabetes who develop Takotsubo, but it's not that that has been identified as a condition that we see as a predisposing factor to developing Takotsubo. There are other groups in the United States, I think, who think differently and who have looked at data sets combining several states, several hospitals from different states, where they did notice an increase in those who have type 2 diabetes in their cohorts. So again, this is something that only very large studies are going to be able to settle. What I can say with certainty is that we have also had patients with type 2 diabetes. So whilst not a predisposing factor, the association has been seen.
Thank you very much, Professor Dawson and Caron. One last question for Mike before I leave it to you to close the event. How can I make a donation to the BHF during this event?
Oh, it's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Yes, you can go to the BHF website. It's as simple as that. It's a very easy way of donating. Okay, so thanks, Leanne. I hope you've all found this a helpful and informative event. I have to say I've found it fantastic and fascinating. There are over 20 questions that we haven't yet got to. So as I said earlier on, everybody that asked those will get personalized email responses. So please look out for those. And I have to say it's great to see that we've had people join us from around the world for the session. We've got a couple of poll questions we'd like to ask again before we close. The first one is up on screen, or will be shortly. And it's the same one that we asked at the start of the session, which is, how much do you know about research into Takotsubo Cardiomyopathy? Please again rate from 1 to 5. Well, that's a pretty significant shift, because if my memory is not playing tricks on me, I think we were just over 50% were on 1 earlier on. So measured on this, it seems to have been hugely beneficial. So thank you again for the presenters. So it just leaves me to thank you. Oh, sorry, there was one final question that we have to go. The 4th poll question, getting ahead of myself. Has this event increased your likelihood to support the British Heart Foundation? Well, that's great. That's a great result. Thank you for everybody for that. Okay, so it just leaves it to me to thank everybody for attending, but particularly thanks to Caron and Professor Dawson. We'd like to encourage people to give their feedback and suggestions by completing the survey that will be sent out by email, as it will help us shape and improve the future live and ticking events. Also a reminder that the event was recorded and it will be available on the website from next week. And just looking ahead, we'll hope you'll join us for our next event, which is on Wednesday, the 24th March, and the subject is vascular dementia. So if that's a topic that you're interested in learning more about, please tell your friends and family, and also share through your networks. If you want more details, please visit the website at bhf.org.uk/public events. So it just leaves it to me to say thank you very much to everybody, and goodbye.